theory bad arguments. So the scenario is that you are the 2NR, so the scenario is this: I am the 2NR, and you, as the student, are going to be giving the 2AR. And as the negative, I did not read theory in the 1N, and you read theory in the 1AR. So what follows is a bunch of overview-ish type arguments saying 1AR theory, bad, etc. And these are all arguments you'd have to fight through and beat in order to win theory in the 2AR. Okay, are you ready, Jack?
Yeah.
Cool. So if you're following along at home, I'd highly recommend you flow this, then pause your timer, give yourself some prep time, respond to these arguments, compare how you do with how Jack does, incorporate my feedback, and then watch part 2 of this video series. 1AR theory is theoretically illegitimate for 3 reasons. 1. No matter how many arguments I can put out, the 2AR can just respond to everything and I have no chance to answer it back. Thus, the app gets to synthesize, extend, and weigh dropped arguments on a theory debate. All of these are essential components of argumentation and all are impossible for the negative to do. Theory in the AR is legitimate in policy debate because there are 2 negative speeches afterwards that the neg can use to extend arguments and respond to answers because LD lacks a structure. AR theory is not acceptable. Don't let them say that I made too many arguments for him to respond to. This just shows he can't cover arguments and doesn't refute this argument about the general concept. Second, theory in the 1AR is equivalent to a new argument. Theory is an offensive argument that is not a direct substantive turn on the NC to the NC or AC standard, and it's not an extension of the affirmative. It would be as if they read a new part of the AC in the AR, which is fundamentally unfair. Third, going for theory in the 1AR allows for the affirmative to make the first 30 minutes of the debate completely irrelevant. However, this takes away half of my speeches in 7 minutes, whereas it only gets rid of 6 minutes of affirmative time and 1/3 of its speeches. Thus, it uniquely puts me at a disadvantage. It also outweighs all affirmative theory standards since it has the clearest bright line ever, given that it's an actual mathematical disparity. Next. The ability for the affirmative to check abuse is not denied by arguments saying 1AR theory bad. A point is you could have used cross-examination to effectively remove arguments from the flow and expose obvious errors in logic and take out the burdens before even beginning the AR. B point is you could have outlined what fair negative strategy was in the text of the AC. This would not have to been an exhaustive list of preempts. They would have just had to justify the same statements that they are running in a theory shell. If those statements are really that important to them, they should take the time to outline them in the AC. They're going to say that they don't want to waste time on that in the text of the AC. However, if they think that theory is a waste of time, then you want to vote against them for wasting our time, taking away a chance to have a fair educational debate. This is also the only fair way to run theory. Thus, you should vote now. My opponent has already committed the abuse by reading theory in the 1AR. If my arguments make sense to you, you should sign your ballot now to prevent the 2AR from making responses to this that are impossible for me to answer. At the very least, you should air neg on the theory debate if you're having trouble resolving it, since I don't get a chance to answer it in the 2AR. Next set of arguments is that theory is fundamentally unfair. 1. The rules established by theory are only initiated after the round has begun. Because this is unfair since it puts an impossible burden on me. There is no preset rule book that determines what the fair rules of debate are, so there would be no way for me to conform to this rule in my first speech, so I never had a chance not to commit to the violation. This is unfair because it precludes any potential NC strategy from being deemed legitimate. Second, arguments take away affirmative ground because they prove the resolution false. An argument that did not take away affirmative ground would not be a negative argument. That means that their theory arguments would put the burden on me of giving them turns to read against the NC in order to show them that I'm not taking away any ground. This is absurd because that would mean that I would have to refute myself in the NC. This is the worst competitive disadvantage possible, because it means that I have to literally show that I lose in order for my arguments to be fair. Third, every argument in a debate round limits our ground in some fashion. Framework arguments set out acceptable limits of argumentation. Standards define relevant offenses. There is no clear bright line between those acceptable scope narrowing mechanisms and the ground scheme my opponent is talking about. The logical extension of his arguments would be to eliminate any negative argumentation, which is unimaginably unfair. Next. The goal of theory is to assert a fair rule of debate. Using theory in a debate round is contrary to that purpose. A point is that everything within a debate round is shaped by a desire to win, or we wouldn't be participating in competitive activity. Thus, the rules are created are unfairly skewed towards whoever introduces them. Cross by their fairness voter. B point is a game cannot be coherently governed by rules established in the process of playing it. This is because because a game is defined by the rules that govern it, but those rules are what allow us to determine the winner. However, if the rules are constantly being developed, there's no way for the players to know how to become the winners. C point is that theory is supposed to be a fair rule, but the rules that get established is determined by who does a better job on the theory debate. This is not necessarily the result of the rule being asserted being qualitatively superior. It could simply be the result of the debater having a superior strategy or speaking faster. So, the project of theory fails. D point is theory often just annoys competitors and judges rather than convincing them that they should change their style of debate. I'm certainly aggravated that I'm having to read this instead of engaging in a substantive debate about the issues in the resolution. So, if the purpose of theory is establishing rules is important, vote against them since they are contrary to the establishment of the rules. Even though you're voting based on fairness, these harms are unique to my opponent, so don't let him make the arguments that I'm also making theoretical arguments and therefore I link back in. A point is that these harms link to introducing the theory flow and you introduce it, not me. B point is I'm not trying to establish rules for the debate, I'm just showing that the way you attempt to do so is illegitimate. Thus, vote neg. So, go ahead. Yeah, the argument is that for me to show that I'm not skewing your ground, I would have to tell you how to beat the NC. So basically, I'd have to show how I lose in order for me to beat background arguments. So give yourself 5 minutes of prep time, okay? Cool. And one thing I want you to think about is the order in which you respond to this. I would not necessarily recommend going top down. Isolate the most important arguments you need to beat back first and beat those back and then move in that order. Cool. It's prep time starting now. So if you're following along at home, give yourself some prep time. So Jack has taken some prep time, and he's going to give presumably the 2AR, which deals with these arguments. And I want you to flow what he says, and then we will analyze it and suggest improvements. And I want you to incorporate both the arguments he makes and the feedback I gave to those arguments into your own practice, and then practice a redo until you get it perfect and compare it to the version that Jack gets. I'm ready whenever you are, buddy. You can start with like where you're going to start, but I would like you to signpost. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So let's go through this. So I think in terms of order, here's how I would have started. I would have started on the arguments that theory can still check abuse if 1AR theory is bad. So in my opinion, the strongest argument for why 1AR theory is okay is because absent 1AR theory being acceptable, the AF literally has no recourse against abusive NC strategies. And so the person who wrote this has preempted that and made a CX checks argument and made an argument that you can outline what a fair neg strategy is. So I would have started there. I would have said if I beat back this argument, it outweighs every other argument on the reasons why theory is bad or 1AR theory is illegitimate. Because all those other arguments will have link defense on them, A, and B are reversible, i.e. there's some possibility that they cut both ways. However, if I have no recourse, the neg will always take advantage. It also makes theory incredibly irreciprocal in a world where the AF can't read it. Does that make sense? So, sorry, what? So yeah, so the A point is strength of link, that there will be link defense on all the arguments for why 1AR theory is bad, which means that this reason why 1AR theory is good would outweigh. And the B point would be that there's a reversibility concern. That like there's no reversibility of abuse in a world where I get 1AR, where I don't get 1AR theory, but in a world where I do read 1AR theory, there is still the possibility that the neg can beat that back. So, starting with CX checks, I think the first argument here should be that it's telling that the only solution I have is to beat it back in CX. Like, that relies on you conceding that it's unfair in cross-examination. The second argument I would make here is that pointing out obvious flaws in logic is not the same as pointing out it's unfair. Even if it's obviously flawed in logic, it could still be incredibly unfair, right? You could read 20 nibs, and they could all be obviously flawed in logic, and I could use CX, but that doesn't change that the 1AR just got disproportionately harder. And C point here is that there's a huge net benefit to reading it in the 1AR as opposed to using CX as a check, and that is developing good theory norms. We actually get to flesh out the conversation, which ironically probably solves the arguments that there are no set rules in debate. The point is that theory norming can help create good rules, right? So if we look at ellipses, for example, they have become incredibly unpopular. Same with brackets in your evidence without telling that it's bracketed, etc. Or a prioris. Yeah, they are still kind of popular, but they run less. And then the D point here is that another net benefit to reading it in the 1AR as opposed to CX is preserving the value of cross-examination. Does that make sense? Cool. Right, so that also creates a lack of deterrent effect where the negative is encouraged to be abusive because either you waste your cross-examination pointing it out or you miss it, in which case they get away with it. Bottom line is, using CX as the solution to theory or like neg abuse is an awful idea. Cool. The next idea is significantly more plausible, which is you should read the interps in the AC. The A point here, though, is that there's no end point at how many interps should be read. So this puts you in a double bind. Either you read too many interps and you don't get enough substantive arguments within the AC, or you do not read a lot of interps, in which case you can't read 1AR theory if they're abusive. Does that make sense? So it's not that you're not... So the next argument I would make is that the idea that you don't want to read theory because it's a waste of time is a flawed idea. Like, you would read theory in the 1AC, but the point is that there has been no violation, so you're not sure what theory you should read. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so the thing here that is crucial is for you to use examples. Does that make sense? Well, the example I would give is any given AC would have to read potential interps about neg burdens, about status of the counterplan, about K versus theory, about fair neg frameworks, about whether or not neg is allowed to read nibs or a prioris, about like that in and of itself is such a significant amount. Exactly. Exactly. So, after this, I would say this establishes that there is no recourse in a world where we accept the two in our arguments. Does that make sense? Cool. So after that, then, I would go to the general category of arguments that say introducing theory is fundamentally unfair. Because you absolutely need to beat this back. So the first thing I do is I would group it and I would weigh. Exactly. Exactly. Next thing I would do is I would go down the line by line. So I don't want to give you all the answers. I would like to see how you do this in your redo. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to email you these arguments, and then I want to see you respond to them. Does that make sense? Cool. The next category of arguments I would respond to is the last four arguments I made, that using theory in a debate round is contrary to the purpose of asserting a fair rule. Does that make sense? This is the A, B, C, and D point. The D point that you missed was the argument that judges and competitors are annoyed by theory. Yeah, and so well, let's see how you do, and depending on how you do, I will help you adjust accordingly. That argument is so presumably one common response here would be you violate your own arguments because you're reading theory to show theory is unfair. So it's a contradiction, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it probably is a good argument. Right. And a rule they're establishing. Cool. And then, if you have time, the last category I would get to is that the 1AR theory arguments are bad. Because you're probably ahead on the weighing argument that even if 1AR theory is bad, it's even worse for me not to be able to read it. Make sense? So essentially, another way to put that is that checking back abuse probably outweighs. Yeah. Cool. So, do you have any questions about this drill? Okay, the last thing I want to point out to you is that I'm not very fast. So, in a real round, presumably somebody was able to read this in maybe 2 to 3 minutes of the 2NR. So, your 2AR can't devote a significant amount of time. Like, you need to be able to get through this quickly, like 90 seconds tops. Does that make sense? So, focus on grouping and being efficient. Okay. Any questions? Okay. I'm going to end the recording. Stop.